Hi students, and welcome to today's live IELTS class. My name is Adrian and I'm streaming to you from beautiful Victoria here on the west coast of Canada. I hope everybody is having a good week so far, staying productive, staying strong. This is a members chat class. Everybody is welcome to watch, and we are looking at an IELTS reading section. We're going to practice this reading passage from our course materials, and hey, let's go for that band 9, that perfect score, or 39 out of 40. Basically, to get a band 9 in the reading, you have to get 39 or 40 of the 40 questions correct. Welcome members. Hi Janil. Hi Rashika. While we wait for a few more peers, this lesson is presented to you by aehelp.com for academic IELTS success. Visit us there. For the general IELTS, check us out at IELTShelp.com. That's general IELTShelp.com. On both of those websites, we have loads and loads of materials to help you improve your reading and your performance for the IELTS exam. We have original practice tests, lesson videos. This is our academic website here, aehelp.com. You can click this big red button to join our premium package. It is a one-time payment for lifetime access to all of our videos, practice exams, interactive courses, mobile applications, lots more. We are a British Council Registration Center for IELTS and certified agents, so you're in good hands with us. This is our general IELTS website here at gltshelp.com. It's the green background again. Click that big red button to join us there. Welcome to our moderator, Carolina. Hi, June, Nick Hill, Sammy. Good to see more students joining in today. All right, everyone. For your mobile phones and tablets, get our apps, Academic IELTS Help and General IELTS Help. This one links to aehelp.com, and sensibly, General IELTS Help links to gieltshelp.com. You can follow us on Instagram, IELTS_AEHelp and gielts help. And if you have questions, send me an email, adrian@aehelp.com. Darshan, I'm glad that you're enjoying the premium course. That's great. Make sure to go through it step by step. Check out the study plans as well that will guide you. Hi, honey. Long time no see. Good to have you in the class. If you want just our exam books in hard copy, you can grab them from Amazon. Search for aehelps Academic IELTS or ghelps General IELTS. And again, we have reading right now, and then we will have a task 2 writing class for everyone in about 90 minutes where everybody can join the chat. And we'll have more classes tomorrow and on Saturday. Let's get to today's reading. This might be familiar to some of our members who have been members for a longer period of time. And with reading, it is a very important point to keep in mind that you should read the same passage when you're preparing for the IELTS several times throughout your studies. So if you begin your IELTS learning 90 days before your IELTS exam, during that time, it's a good idea to look at the same IELTS passage 2-3 times before your test. Sometimes what students do is they just keep looking at different passages all the time. So they look at one IELTS passage only once. It's not really effective because it doesn't allow you to identify mistakes, think about those, fix them, and then at a later time reassess with the same material your improvement in comprehension, reading fluency. So it is absolutely a good idea to revisit the same passage a few times over and over to pick up the vocabulary and to improve on mistakes, okay? Hopefully everybody caught that. Okay, that was an important point. Maybe I'll even write a quick note for everybody here. So It's definitely a tendency that I've seen students to just keep reading different passages every single time during their studies, and that's not as efficient. Okay, so and it's the same for the listening, of course. You should revisit the same listening audio a couple of times as well. So while practicing your reading for the IELTS, it is very effective to revisit the same passage every few weeks, 2 to 3 times, in order to identify your weaknesses, make improvements, and pick up vocabulary. Okay, so that is a good idea. All right. So let's get into this reading. The title is The London Underground. Okay, what's another way to say underground? There are a couple of synonyms in English. Members, any other ways to say underground? So what is this London Underground? And again, this is reading, so make sure to read with me when we do this reading. Okay, as soon as you see this title, you should always critically think about it. What is it? Why is it? Try to think about synonyms. Sammy says tube. June says it could also be called the subway or the light rail. There's another way to call it. I haven't seen it yet. It's probably the most popular way to say it internationally. So, yeah, when you see the title, think of some other. So the underground here is the tube. It's commonly called the tube in the UK especially. There you go, Carlos. Yeah, the metro, right? Subway is kind of the popular way to call it in North America. Subway, light rail, metro. Yeah. Okay. So those are all kind of the same. All right. Well, you want to take a few more steps here. So the London Underground, it's the title. You want to do a bit of prediction before you begin reading. This will help your comprehension. And this is really important to get the highest band score possible, right? So there should be some questions coming into mind, like what is the London Metro? Okay, how would you answer that? Members, if I just asked you, what is the London Metro? How would you define that in a simple way? So if I came from Mars to Earth to visit you, and I said, hey, Carlos, what is this London Underground that I see here from my observatory on Mars? Can you explain this to me in 1 or 2 sentences? What would you say? How would you explain it? So Sammy says it's the fastest transport system. Sammy, I would be surprised. So I would look at you and go, oh, really? It's faster than airplanes? So you'd have to give me a little bit of a clearer explanation than that. Okay, I would be confused as the alien visiting Earth, because I would imagine that your spaceships and your airships or airplanes are the fastest transport system. So what is it? Nick Hill says it's a mode of transportation which connects different cities. Nick Hill, I would be confused there as well, because I don't really see the metro connecting different cities. I say train systems. Okay, Janelle says it's a transit system that conveniently conveys masses without traffic problems from one place to another. All right, Janelle, that's not bad. Yeah, so I would say something like, Yeah, something like this. Okay. Deepika, welcome to our group of members. So I would say it's an intra-city, sorry, not intercity, it's an intra-city, so it's within the city. It's an intra-city underground train transport system for people to quickly commute around London. Okay, so that would be kind of my definition of what the London Metro actually is, right? It's an underground train system that basically gets people from A to B within London very, very quickly. The reasons of why: because it avoids traffic, it moves in straighter lines and such. That's the next question. Okay, all right. So another question I might ask myself here before we read further is, why are we reading, or why am I reading about the London Metro and not a different one? Okay, so what would be your answer to this one? I mean, it doesn't say metro systems around the world, or it doesn't say the metro system in Tokyo or Osaka, but specifically here it says the London Underground. So thinking critically, rationally, about this title, a question that would pop into my mind is, why am I reading about the London Metro and not a different one here? So what's the logic behind it? What could be the reasons for that? What do you think? So why would we be reading about the London Metro and not one of the many other intracity metro systems that are in the world? Okay. So Nick Hill says because it's popular in London. Sammy says because it's something special technology that is available now. Janil says it's a successful project that helps a lot throughout time. Money mitigating population levels. Darshan says it's very famous in the world. Well, IELTS is British, so it makes sense as well that they would be writing about this one. Angela says it's famous one. Carlos says could be treated as an antique. It must mean something for London's history. Yeah, so good, Carlos. So it is one of the original metro systems. Yeah, so we can assume it's probably one of the oldest. Okay, so Natalie says maybe the oldest. I actually think, Natalie, the oldest one is in Budapest. So Budapest has the first metro system. I've lived there, and it's an old one, but very, very close to the oldest. London is just shortly after. Okay, so it's one of the original metro systems. It's one of the most developed. And used metro systems. Okay, yeah, so it's original, it's very, very well developed. There are lots of metro lines, and it's widely used. Okay, so absolutely, that makes sense. And well, IELTS is British, so why not, right? Yeah, so when you're preparing for the IELTS exam, this is kind of just a side note, but it's not a bad idea to look at some of British history and learn some information about the UK, because IELTS exams are developed in the UK, so there is a little bit of a greater chance of, let's say, topics that pertain to the UK as opposed to other places. Australia is the other kind of key player, the IDP, the International Testing Department. IDP is a big player in the IELTS as well. So you'll find that a lot of IELTS materials are UK or Australian in nature. Okay, so that's kind of, it seems obvious, and it is, but sometimes students miss that. So keep that in mind. Okay, so IELTS materials often focus on historical and cultural topics that are popular in the UK and Australia. Not always, but it tends to be the case, okay? All right. So we've done a bit of critical thinking. Also, you have this picture that should remind you to visualize. So while you're reading this kind of information about the metro, you should imagine that you're there. You should imagine that you're visiting London. You're using the metro to go from one tourist location to the other. So from Buckingham Palace to Big Ben or wherever you're going around London, okay? So, June, not poor Canada. Canada actually does come up in IELTS as well because Canada is considered a British Commonwealth country. So, Canada is, I would say, the third most popular topic in IELTS, if we were to say specifically. Okay, so we're visualizing, we've done a bit of critical thinking, and now we look at the questions, okay? So the first set of questions is yes, no, not given. This means you have to indicate yes if the statement agrees with the claims of the writer. If the statement contradicts the claims of the writer, you have to write no. And if it's not possible to figure out what the writer is thinking about that statement, then you just simply write not given. Okay, this kind of question is absolutely useless to review before your reading passage because you have no idea if the information is not given, if it contradicts the author. So avoid reading this question before the passage because it can very easily confuse you. The brain is not a linear machine, so if you read this before the passage, your brain might have some difficulty figuring out if you actually read it during the passage or after the passage, so just ignore it, okay? All right, so ignore that type of question. Then we have complete the summary below. These are kind of interesting questions. It says choose one word only. So you have to look at this summary. This summarizes a part of the text or all of the text. And you have to basically fill in the missing blanks. All of this information is somewhere in the passage. Now, careful with this one, so don't try to search for where this is contained in the passage because it's impossible to know. Sometimes this question comes from many parts in the passage. Sometimes it comes from one big paragraph in the passage, but you won't really know until you read it. So it's just a good idea to skim over this question before you read, and then read the passage and answer. So here we go. The growth of the London Underground. Now, this subtitle does give me a lot of information that I'm going to read about the development of the London Underground. So the development, the history of the metro. Okay. Angelo, I don't think there are any native speakers in the chat or among our members. However, there are definitely some high-level users of English language for sure. Okay, so let's skim over this. Again, it's reading, so read with me. The first line of the Underground was constructed in 1863, and over the next something decades, additional lines would increase the breadth of the system's reach. By the start of World War I, the central part of London was completely covered. Through the mid-20th century, the focus was on making the system available to those living in the something of the city. Before 1933, there were many governing bodies. These were some kind of companies with their own contracts and land. Conversely, management of the tube today is public, looked after by the transport something. Okay, All right, here we have completing a sentence with the correct ending. This one's a little bit interesting because half the sentence, the half that is the question, so 10, 11, 12, 13, this information is in the passage. However, with the choices, we have 6 choices, so at least a couple of these will not be in the passage. So I'm not too interested in the choices here. There could be confusing information. So I'm just going to read the first half, that's the question here. Okay, so the tube map is. All right, so this piece here tells me that I'm going to read something about the map of the London Metro. Okay. All right, the map is useful because it allows a person. Beck's key insight was, and London's core is. Okay, so definitely some good content about this map of the metro as well. All right, so that's all the information that I get from this right now. And now I'm ready to read the passage. So I go back, and this is all happening nice and fast. And I'm sticking to strategy. Okay. So here we go. Let's go from the top. Let's read together. And again, visualize. So picture yourself being in London, being a part of this information. Okay. Here we go. One of the most notable aspects of London, the Underground or Tube, is also one of the most utilized by locals and visitors alike. Over 1.3 billion passengers use the London Underground every year. If you have ever visited the city, it is very likely that you have been told to mind the gap. In continuous operation for over 150 years, the London Underground began as just one line run by a private corporation. Today, the system is publicly owned and is comprised of 11 separate lines. The growth and development of the Underground has mirrored London's development as, first, an industrial powerhouse, and second, a financial and tourism center. Okay, so whenever you read a paragraph, you should ask yourself some questions in your mind, especially when you're practicing at home. Here I want to ask myself, what is this paragraph about? So if you had to answer this question in a very simple way, what is this paragraph about? You should practice this all the time, this kind of what's called critical reading. Okay, so we can call this critical, analytical, active reading. Okay, so after you read a paragraph, ask yourself some questions and answer them, of course. So what is this paragraph about? All right. Sammy says it's about the background of the London Underground. Janelle says it's the history of the London Underground. Yeah, I think those are okay answers. I would answer it a little bit differently. Okay. Yeah, June, exactly. So June's asking, it's like treating each passage as if we have a list of headings questions, right? Yeah, absolutely, June. That's a very smart question that you're asking, and it is, yeah. Because list of headings questions, when you can do those well, they will actually really help you to answer all of the questions in a great way, simply because you understand the passage much more. So it's kind of the best type of coherence question that we could ask, like what is the title of each paragraph? It also helps you to keep organization of the information in the passage. So yes, you're basically practicing list of headings for each passage that you read. Okay, so Angelo says the background and history of the subway. Rashika says it's the origin of the London Underground. Deepika says the evolution of the London Metro. Yeah, I would also say, so for me, the answer here would be I think if somebody asked me, what is this paragraph about? I would say it's about the importance of the Underground for London. And if somebody said why, I would say, well, it's because the London Underground is a critical part of the transportation system in London. It mirrors the evolution and growth of London as tourism and as the financial sector as well. So this paragraph really emphasizes the importance. It even says that if you ever visit London, you might hear people saying, mind the gap. It means pay attention to the metro lines as well, right? So development is a part of it, but I would say more accurately, it's emphasizing the importance of the underground for London, or the tube, okay? So you always want to be concise and accurate. That's really important, okay? So whenever you answer such questions, it's important that you are both concise and accurate. Okay. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, how do I do that, right? One way to check this is to do reading exercises with partners or in a class and debate your answers. Okay. So if you have the opportunity, if you're in a class with other students studying for the IELTS, or if you have a study partner, read the same passage together at the same time. Read a paragraph and write down separately what you think that paragraph is about. Then compare your answers. If you have the same answer, that's great. That probably means you're on the right track, both of you. If you have different answers, then it's a really good opportunity for discourse where you can discuss with each other why you summarized the main point of the paragraph differently. Okay, that can give you a lot of insight into not only your comprehension of English, but also the way that your brain processes the information that you're reading. And it'll be very good for your learning development. Is everybody clear on that? So whenever you have the chance, humans are social creatures, so we usually do better when we work in groups, okay? So if you have the chance, try this exercise with a partner or in a group or in a class where you read the same passage, you read a paragraph, you pose the question, what is this paragraph about? Answer separately on a piece of paper and then compare and find common ground, okay? So Sammy says, okay. Carolina says, okay. Carolina, can you please write me an email to remind me about setting up study groups for the IELTS exam? And I'll definitely do that. I know we discussed that in the past, but as you know, I've got so much to do all the time. And it's one of those ones that I've kind of forgotten to do over the past few months. But if you send me a reminder email, Carolina, then I'll definitely take a look at that this week and look at setting up like a WhatsApp study group where students can actually try this, okay? All right, so let's get back to the reading. Thanks, Carolina. Okay, I see, got that. All right, so next paragraph, here we go. Great Britain was the epicenter of the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries. Cities like Glasgow, Birmingham, and London gave birth to inventions such as the steam engine, which revolutionized transportation and travel. People began to flock to these cities for jobs, opportunity, and prosperity. London was the destination of choice for many of these people. In 1800, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the population of London was less than 1 million people. By 1900, that number would balloon to over 6.5 million people. There were many factors which contributed to this growth, not least of which was improved sanitation. But one factor in particular allowed for the mobility of those people across the ever-expanding city, the construction and development of the London Underground. So here I'm reading a little bit about the history of London, modern history specifically, the time of the Industrial Revolution and the growth of the city. Okay, let's keep going. All right. So the first line was constructed in 1863. Over the next 50 years, many more lines would be added, resulting in the virtual blanketing of central London by the start of the First World War. Through the interwar period and mid-20th century, the focus for the subway developers was extending the network to the suburbs of London, where an increasing number of Londoners were now residing. Interestingly, it wasn't until 1933 that the developers of the network unified into a single governing body. Until that time, there were a host of private companies competing for contracts, land, and customers. Today, the London Underground is owned and operated by the London Transport Authority. Transport for London. So here I'm looking at some information specifically about the development and history of the London Underground. Okay, that's clearly what's happening here. Who owned it, when the first lines were added, when more lines were added. Okay, so I'm keeping catalog of this in my mind. All right, let's keep going. Perhaps the most recognizable symbol of the London Underground is the tube map, designed in 1931 by Underground employee Harry Beck. With its many colorful lines and intricate details, the tube map is not only useful, but aesthetically pleasing as well. Indeed, a print copy of the tube map is a popular souvenir for tourists to put on their walls back home. That it is artful is, however, only part of its appeal. The tube map is incredibly useful. Just a moment spent looking at the map can help you determine how to get from any point in London to any other point. Beck was able to accomplish this by realizing that the map did not need to exactly match the reality of the tube geography. For instance, a line may go through all sorts of turns through its route, yet on the map it is represented as a straight line. This simplification worried the Underground management in 1931, but soon enough the tube map became a sensation, both for its usefulness and its elegant design. Okay, so here the paragraph is clearly about the tube map. It's talking about the fact that it's useful and beautiful and why. And now we go on. Okay, so let's keep going. Today, the tube is used more than ever, and London continues to grow. With the center of London becoming a financial hub over the past 50 years, more and more jobs have been created in the English capital. While this has, in some sense, hollowed out the core of London, it has also highlighted the need for more lines to service the ever-increasing number of London suburbs. Additionally, tourism to London has never been higher. Well over 30 million people visited the city in 2015, each of whom undoubtedly at some point used the venerable Underground. Okay, this is clearly the conclusion. It talks again about the importance of the London Underground and how it's a major part of the city of London. Awesome. Now let's look at the questions. Okay, so here's an important tip before we continue with these questions. Okay, so we'll get to the questions in just a quick moment here. Okay. In order, so remember this. This is a reminder. Okay. So in order to get a band 7.5 or more in your IELTS reading, you must be able to answer about 60% of the questions without searching the text. Okay, so keep that in mind. You should not be searching for every single answer. That is not the right idea. It's going to take too long and you will likely make more mistakes. Okay. Yeah, June, I've talked about that before. So June is asking another good question here. So June says, another question that came to my mind is, while reading, we might find the answers to some questions popping up. At this time, should we keep reading, or can we answer those questions fresh in our minds? June, do not stop to answer questions, okay? So it's a good question. I'll tell you why it's not a good idea, okay? And you'll realize this in your studies and if you've done the official exam as well. So do not stop to answer questions while you read, except for list of headings. Okay, of course, there has to be an exception. But the idea here, June, is do not stop to answer questions except for list of headings. You only stop at the end of the body paragraph. This will make sense in a second. So, because, okay, stopping to answer questions will break your flow of reading and information processing, and there might be a better answer later in the passage. Okay, so the two big reasons why you should not stop, usually, June, when you're reading to answer questions is, firstly, you don't want to break your flow of information processing. So you don't want to break your flow of understanding the passage, understanding all of the information. You want to just kind of keep going. The only reason you can stop for list of headings is because it's at the end of a paragraph. So you have a completed piece of information or idea. It's not in the middle of a paragraph. You shouldn't stop in the middle of a paragraph. Okay, it's not a good idea. And also, sometimes what happens is candidates like, oh, there's the answer, and then they grab it, they put the answer in to the question, and they keep reading, and then suddenly they read another answer, and they're like, oh, wait a second, I think this answer is better than the last one. And now they've stopped twice, so now the flow of information is being broken twice, and you could have easily missed a different answer for a different question as well. It's not a good way, okay? Strategically, you want to read, finish, then answer, okay? All right, so yes, no, not given. It's kind of an if this, then that computer logic that you use for this type of question. So your first step is to figure out whether the information is given or not given. If the answer is given, then you figure out if it's yes or no. Okay, so first, we don't worry about the yes and the no, but we just worry about this not given. So if it is impossible to say what the writer thinks about this is what we want to figure out first. Okay, then this is what we want to figure out second. So first, let's figure out if it's given or if it's not given. And in order to do that, all you really need to do is ask yourself, is this statement important for this passage? So over 1 million passengers use the tube each year. Is it important for this passage to know how many people use the London Underground? That's the simple question here. So members, is it important to know is it important to know how many people or how many passengers actually use the London Underground? So important, would it be given? Nikhil says, yeah, it's important. Janil says, yeah, important. I agree. I think it's very important to know how many people use it. So we know that it's given. Okay. All right. Now that I figured out that it's given, now I go to my second aspect, which is the yes and the no. So is it true or is it a yes that yes, over 1 million passengers use the London Underground? So yes or no. Now I can figure this out. So is it a yes that over 1 million passengers use the tube each year? Or is it a no? Janil says it's a yes. I agree. It's a yes. So my answer is yes. Okay. The passage says over 1 billion, and clearly over 1 billion people is over 1 million people. So 1 billion is greater than 1 million, right? So it's definitely a yes. Okay. Don't be fooled by, I've had students say no because it's 1 billion, but that's logically flawed because 1 billion is more than 1 million. So if more than 1 billion people use it, then definitely more than 1 million people use it, right? Okay, so that's the logic. So it's an if this, then that type of system. The tube is privately owned. Always pay attention to tenses. Is it important to know who owns the tube? Important? I would say yes. So that means that it's given. Okay, so now I want to figure out yes or no. Okay, so is the London Metro today privately owned? Sammy, I think you're answering that question. So Sammy says, no, it's not owned privately today. Carlos says no. Deepika says no as well. Yeah, no, it's not. It's publicly owned, right? It used to be privately owned by some corporation, but not right now. Okay. All right, so no. The steam engine was invented in London. The steam engine was invented in London. Is that important to know? My answer is maybe. Because the metro in some ways is a kind of steam engine. And I somewhat remember maybe reading a little bit about the steam engine there in the beginning. Okay. So it's maybe important. If my answer is maybe, what should I do? If I'm not sure if it's important, I won't be able to figure out if it's given or not given. So what do I, if I can't figure this out? So Nikhil says it's not so important to this topic where the steam engine was invented. And I agree, it's not an absolute critical piece of information of where it was invented. Janelle says check the paragraph. June says not highly, but if my answer is maybe, then I'm going to check. So steam engine is something that I can skim read for. And I know that there was a bit of history at the beginning there. So I seem to remember the second paragraph. Great Britain was the epicenter of industrial revolution. Cities like Glasgow, Birmingham, and London gave birth to inventions such as the steam engine, which revolutionized transportation. Aha, so there is an invention here, steam engine. Okay, and it says that cities like Glasgow, Birmingham, and London gave birth to inventions such as the steam engine. So from this sentence, can I be sure that the steam engine was invented in London? No, I can't, because it could have been Birmingham, it could have been Glasgow. I don't know, right? I'm not sure here where the steam engine. So according to the author, it's impossible to know what the author thinks about this, right? So it's not given. It could have been London, but that's not specifically given. So now that I checked, I can say, okay, there. I can say, I can't figure that out. Basically, if you can't figure it out, it means it's impossible to say what the writer thinks, okay? So if you can't figure it out, nobody can figure it out. It's not your own knowledge. So if you know that the steam engine was invented in London, you can't use your own knowledge. So it's not according to you, but it's according to the writer. Okay, careful about that. Sometimes people will say, oh yeah, sure, that's true, because I've read that in a book. Okay, London grew by a factor of 6 from 18 to 1900. Is it important to know the population growth of London for the London Metro? Yeah, I would say yes, because the two are very closely related. And is it true that London grew by a factor of 6 from 1800 to 1900? I specifically remember these numbers because they were very visual numbers, okay? So Deepika says, yeah, that's an important one. So it's definitely given, okay? And Janelle says the answer is yes. It grew from 1 million to over 6.5. It even said ballooned. You can kind of visualize this ballooning of London's population. So that's a definite yes there. Okay, and then number 5, improved sanitation was the least important factor in London's growth. Okay, so is improved sanitation important for this passage? This is a bit trickier. There is a paragraph that talks about London's growth. Okay, and again, it was this one here. So sometimes it is a bit tricky. These types of questions are looking for those band 8, band 9 level readers. Because this one seems to be a little bit off topic, but this paragraph that talks about the growth of London, to give background to the metro, actually does talk about improved sanitation. Here at the end, there were many factors which contributed to this growth, not least of which was improved sanitation. So not least of which means that improved sanitation was very important. Okay. If that's a bit tricky to figure out, use your logic as well, right? So everybody knows what sanitation means. What does sanitation mean? So you do have to be a critical thinker beyond a critical reader. Everybody knows what sanitation means. If it's a new word, you should write it down. Sanitation system. Okay. So what is the meaning of sanitation here? Improved sanitation. Sammy, good. Sammy says it's hygiene. Yeah. Here specifically, sewage systems, right? So the toilet water, where that goes in the city, right? Instead of open sewage systems, closed sewage systems, okay? Carlos says has to do with water treatment. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Now, again, thinking logically, of course, we can imagine that as cities are growing, it's important to have good sewage systems. Otherwise, you have disease and other serious issues that would impede the growth of that city. Okay, so in this case, we can confidently answer that improved sanitation was the least important factor in London's growth. No, it was an important factor, right? So it wasn't the least. It was an important factor. It is mentioned, okay? So critical reading, keep in mind for the last one or two true, false, not given, or yes, no, not given questions, you have to be extra careful because they get a little bit trickier with words like the least, okay? And focusing on something that seems like it might be off topic, but still is quite on topic for the paragraph, okay? All right. Okay, everyone, I'm out of time, so I'll leave the remaining questions for you to do on your own. For those of you who have access to our websites, at aehelp.com. So this is our general IELTS website here at gieltshelp.com. Today's reading passage came from our academic website here at aehelp.com. This is exam book 2, test number 4. Okay, so all you really have to do is go to your My Student account, open up your PDFs, and it's there. If you don't have access to all of our exam books, then just send your answers to my email, and I'll send you back the answer key. So here's a look at the paragraph or summary completion question, and here is a look at the sentence completion question. Here are your choices. So you can send those to my email. My email again is adrian@aehelp.com, and we'll send you back the answer keys, okay? All right, everyone. So that's it for today's class. Lots of information about critical reading, the right approach to reading, and how to get that band 9, okay? All right. So I will be back in 30 minutes time with a new task 2 question that was sent to us by one of our members. I believe he or she is a member who sent this question. It's a good question. It's, I think, from a past IELTS exam. So we'll work on that task 2 writing question. We'll start working on it in 30 minutes. Hopefully everybody will come back and join me for that. You're very welcome, Jainil. I hope your speaking went well yesterday. Okay. Yeah, Deepika, exactly. That question can be answered with common sense, but you do have to make sure that it's included in the passage and it's not a not given. So just because the answer is yes doesn't mean always that it's in the passage. So careful with that. Okay. All right. See you June. And I'll see everybody in 30 minutes. I'm Adrian. I'm signing out from Victoria for now, but I'll see you shortly. Bye.